ask him to share with us what he would consider one of the highlights of our 14 years together on Challenge.
Well, I think that probably the most important thing is that we started Challenge, and we were able to do so because Pope John the 23rd abolished the taboo against Catholics fraternizing with non-Catholics, which prevented that program before. And that's a very important thing in our development.
So one of the things in particular, Rabbi, though, that you shared and made history in the program is when you made an altar for me. Do you recall that?
Well, at the first, when you asked me for an altar, I was flabbergasted. I'd never seen an altar. And I had to do some research, but I did. And you also said you have to have it in 10 days. So I worked day and night. And with the help of my wife, we got it together. But the important thing of that simple act of friendship between ourselves,
Yes.
Something very important happened all through the United States. It was publicized throughout the country, and we got many letters telling us how wonderful it was, how improbable it was, and what it meant to us when we read that in our own papers.
I remember that very well, and the audience would be happy to hear that I still use that altar up at St. Cecilia's in Stanwood. But I'd like to share with you now a moment of a highlight in my experience, and that was when we were in Israel together. There was the rabbi, Dr. Fine, myself, 12 Catholics, 12 Protestants, 12 Jews. I was walking through the Arab section of Jerusalem with my good friend, the rabbi, here one evening, and he said to me, you know, I would like to buy you a souvenir. So we went into this little shop operated by a Muslim. We saw this cup in it, and he said, I'd like to buy this cup for you. Well, to summarize for you, he bought this cup from the Muslim, he gave it to me, and that evening we used it at a mass I celebrated at the place where Jesus was condemned to death. Rabbi was with me. It so moved the people who were there that when they came back to put a gold basement to this and put all their names on it here to record for posterity, because it was probably the first time that 12 Catholics, 12 Jews, 12 Protestants would have worshipped together on that spot. On that occasion, we walked down the Via Dolorosa together, arm in arm with the rabbi. Afterwards, he recalled his sentiments on that occasion in our book, Wild Branch and the Olive Tree. He said, as I was thinking of this man, Jesus, walking up those steps to his death at the hands of Roman executioners, I thought also of how every prophet, both among the ancient Hebrews and among all peoples, even to our own day, was misunderstood and rejected by the people of his day. Rabbi, I'll never forget that day. But perhaps before we conclude this brief little program today, how about some of the other things that we were able to accomplish together that has hopes for the future, like Camp Brotherhood? Would you like to say a word about that?
Yes, I would. And I think that was probably the most important thing that we did together, not only for our benefit, but for the benefit of the values that that Camp Brotherhood was built on. And that is essentially ecumenical, that all races, all ethnic groups, all religions would have an opportunity to get to know each other, to work together, and thus develop the kind of a world that we need.
Thank you, Rabbi. We do hope to add to Camp Brotherhood, which is now worth over $1 million. It's being used by groups every weekend, and we hope to add a family center there next year. But our time is running out, so I'd like to take this opportunity, Rabbi, to thank you so much for being with us today, for your initiative in starting Challenge 25 years ago.
But I want to say one thing. This little expression of our 25th anniversary together is extremely important, because it represents what religion ought to be, which it is not.
Thank you, Rabbi, and thank all of you for being with us today.
It was a day to remember Rabbi Levine with tears and prayers, to remember this man, born in a Russian ghetto, ordained as a rabbi in 1932, who brought his leadership to Temple Teher Sinai in Seattle in 1941. And this was a day to be remembered by his good friend, the Catholic priest, who was with him the night before he died, who didn't then know it was time to say goodbye.
As we grieve, let us recall the words of the psalmist, that whether on the journey of life we experience verdant pasture, restful waters, or at times like this, the dark valley, that we must not fear, because our God is with us. Shalom, dear friend. Shalom.